In the city of Saint Denis in Red Dead Redemption 2, there's a small hole-in-the-wall establishment with a massive rat problem known as Doyle's Tavern. Normally, a place like this would be one to avoid, as it looks like it's past its heyday. But today, we're heading through the door to greet a man who just might lead one of the craziest lives of anyone in the Red Dead Redemption world. Charles Chatenay. He's drinking brandy, or he would be if he could just find someone to buy him a drink. And Arthur Morgan just so happens to be that kind soul he's been looking for. As the pair share a drink, they discuss the finer points of American and French society, with Charles mentioning that he was forced out of his home in Paris, France, when the critics there insisted he couldn't paint or draw. He's been wandering the world ever since, searching for a place to settle down where his art won't be scoffed at or put down. He also makes it clear that he has a certain obsession with women, though he doesn't exactly expand on the topic outside of saying that he prefers women over art as they are, quote-unquote, much better. Before saying goodbye, he hands Arthur a doodle of a naked woman as a way to say thank you for the drinks, and they part ways, with Arthur undoubtedly thinking the man is strange, but assuming he'll probably never see him again. That assumption is proven wrong later on, however, when a shout from an alleyway in another part of Saint Denis grabs Arthur's attention. A man with a gun is pounding on the door of a house and screaming for someone inside to come out so they can discuss something the person inside did to the man's wife. At first glance, this is some kind of domestic situation, and Arthur should probably just stay out of it. But a familiar voice from inside the house catches his attention. It's the voice of the whole ass he met in the bar, Mr. Chatenay. The man's attempt to break down the door is finally successful, and he pulls Charles from the building. Arthur intervenes, knocking the assailant unconscious with one punch, before turning his attention to the relieved Frenchman. The conversation is brief, ending with Charles inviting Arthur to an exhibit he is having at a local art gallery, before disappearing back inside the house to presumably get back to romancing the wife of the man Arthur just knocked out. But that one man and his wife aren't the only people in Saint Denis Charles has been involved with. And it turns out his love for women is more than an obsession. As Arthur walks into the gallery to check out the exhibit, he is greeted right away with another man who seems to be upset about the amount of time his wife or girlfriend is spending with Charles Chatenay. She is insisting he'll be pleased when he sees the work that the artist has been doing with her, though he might not like it as much as she thinks he will. Walking through the building, Arthur soon makes his way into the main exhibit to find Charles standing in the back, surrounded by his work and plenty of upset people. The paintings themselves are mostly of women, though there is also one of a man, wearing the same amount of clothing that they entered the world in. It's pretty clear the significant others of the subjects in the paintings were not aware that their loved ones would be posing in the nude, with the images being captured and shared for the world to see by Mr. Chatenay. The ensuing chaos, with the patrons of the gallery telling each other off for their lack of modesty, is rather funny to witness, with even Arthur taking some time to laugh at the absurdity of the situation. A fight breaks out, with Arthur protecting Charles from the angry husbands, sons, and boyfriends, before the pair disappear back into the streets of Saint Denis, so Charles can hide with yet another lover in a different back alley apartment. Very quickly, it's becoming obvious that Charles Chatenay is quite the horn dog, and he seems to like shacking up with other men's wives. Morally speaking, since this channel is mainly focused on morals and ethics in regards to games like this, there isn't really a defense to be mounted for Charles here. It's possible that he doesn't know the women are married, though with the number of husbands he seems to come into contact with, that seems rather unlikely. On the other hand, while infidelity is very wrong, men in 1899, when the game is set, especially more sophisticated men in high society, were very well known for having affairs, with the practice not only being accepted but encouraged in many circles. So, if it's alright in the time for men, then it should be just as okay for women. So, should we really be blaming them, or Charles, for doing the same thing that their husbands are likely taking part in? It isn't really something we can pass off as acceptable, but we have to look at everyone in this situation and judge them all equally for their transgressions, even if society at the time wouldn't. Getting back to Charles, Arthur runs into him one last time as he's making his way to the dock, intent on escaping Saint Denis and looking for a better life somewhere else. He's dressed as a woman and trying very hard to blend into the crowd. He seems to be under the impression that he is being chased out of town for his art, but as Arthur points out, the art is likely not the problem. And even after his claims at the bar when we first met him, I'm starting to think that art wasn't the problem in Paris either. He seems to be a man who doesn't know about or care about boundaries and social norms. If a man comes up to him, angry about a painting, Charles thinks he doesn't like the art. The thought never crosses his mind that the man could be angry about the painting because it includes his naked wife. But let's back up for a second, because that's something else that we should touch on. These men are angry that their wives stripped down for another man. Not because they are hurt emotionally, but because they think that they own their wife's body. No one else should be allowed to see it, and it doesn't matter that the woman consented, or even if nothing sexual happened. Look at the woman and man I mentioned when we first stepped into the art gallery. She was insisting that he should come in and see the painting, at least giving it a chance, and she even seemed proud to show it to him. Would she be so enthusiastic if she felt she'd done anything wrong? If she cheated on him with Charles, it's unlikely that she would be bringing her husband, or boyfriend, to see the results of that affair. But that also highlights a major problem a lot of relationships have, with couples making assumptions instead of communicating properly. The wives and girlfriends no doubt thought that having their portrait done in that way was perfectly fine, maybe even thinking it would be a good surprise for the man they loved. But there was an expectation by the men in the relationship that they would be the only people to ever see their wife or girlfriend naked. The discussion should have been had ahead of time, rather than assumed. And that's the real lesson that Charles Chatenay can teach us about relationships. Romantic relationships can take many forms, but the one thing they all have in common, something we can all learn from, is that you can't just assume your partner feels the same way as you about things. You can be polyamorous, like Charles seems to be, or monogamous, or any combination where two or more consenting adults do whatever they want, so long as you are on the same page as your partner. If the women Charles painted had posed for him with their partner's knowledge, there wouldn't have been any issues on his end. But as it is, he stepped over some boundaries, and Arthur helps him escape the city by sneaking him around some very grumpy-looking men, though not all of them are angry husbands. The first group is upset because Charles apparently shit on their bar, showing his wild ways know no bounds. Defecating in the worst possible places isn't his only other crime, though, as he is also on the run from debt collectors. It turns out he took out a loan of some kind and hasn't paid it back, making me wonder if he might have been someone Strauss might have come across at some point as well. As they duck into the trolley station, Charles thinks he sees another estranged husband, and before Arthur knows what's happening, his lips are locked against Charles's as if they are a couple saying goodbye before a long trip. The distraction turns out to be wholly unnecessary, though, as the man wasn't actually who Charles thought he was. Leaving the trolley station and making their way to the train yard, Charles finds himself being accosted by a man who quickly realizes the pretty woman he wants to take out isn't actually a woman. He isn't the only one to make the mistake, as another group of men catcall Charles from one of the boats on the dock. And at this point, I cannot even imagine being around Charles for more than a few minutes at a time. If this is his normal life, I would be exhausted by lunchtime every day. Thankfully, for Arthur's sake and ours, the journey is almost over as they approach the ship Charles has booked a spot on. It wouldn't be a day out with Charles without a fist fight, though, and Arthur winds up having to beat down another group of men before the pair finally parts ways. Sometime later, Arthur receives a letter from his old friend, talking about how wonderful the island he's fled to is, and letting him know that the drawing he'd given him when they'd first met is now worth some money. Personally, I prefer to keep things like that, as they mean more than the money that they might fetch, but I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who would like the cash instead. And that might be where things end, except for one last detail. Not all the men Charles stole women from came for his head. Some of them wound up in much darker places. One in particular can be found not far from O'Creagh's Run. He doesn't have a name, only going by the moniker the Sculptor, and it turns out he was in the process of carving the likeness of his love's face into the side of a mountain to show the world how beautiful she was, when she fell into the arms of Charles Chatenay. He couldn't bear to live without her, and wound up hanging himself from the scaffolding below her stony effigy. He learned too late that she wanted his arms to hold her, not sculpt her, and as sad as the whole thing is, it's a rather fitting note to end Charles' story on. He loved fast and without caring about anyone but himself. He ran from place to place, breaking hearts and trying desperately to avoid having his nose broken. And his tale is as tragic as it is funny. In the end, he found happiness while many others were left to pick up the pieces, and he was one of the few people to get Arthur Morgan to genuinely laugh, which might be an accomplishment in and of itself. This video was a little different than the videos I usually make that cover the philosophy and ethics of games, but I wanted to branch out a little as there's a lot more to Charles Chatenay than I think many people realize. If you dig deep enough into any game character, you can find lessons from their stories, and I'd love to hear your suggestions in the comments of other characters to dissect. If you liked the video, make sure to hit the thumbs up button so YouTube knows it was worth your time, and subscribe so you don't miss out on my philosophy and ethics game breakdowns or anything else that I cover here on the channel. I've also got a Patreon and channel memberships that provide early access to videos, behind-the-scenes content, and the chance to have your name on the screen for videos while helping to support my work. You can check those out through the links in the description or the join button here on YouTube. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.